Beverly Hills shimmered under a sea of camera flashes as sleek black cars slid into the Gala's private entrance. Valets in sharp uniforms jogged from vehicle to vehicle, opening doors with rehearsed smiles. Paparazzi leaned over barricades, shouting celebrity names into the crisp night air. Among the swirl of designer gowns and velvet suits, a modest gray sedan pulled up, drawing little attention. Amelia Warren stepped out, adjusting the simple navy dress she had chosen with careful thought but limited resources. She smoothed her hair behind one ear and clutched a small, well-loved clutch to her side, taking a steady breath as she stepped toward the red carpet. Before her heel even touched the carpet, a security guard intercepted her. He was young, nervous perhaps, but the authority in his voice was unmistakable. "Ma'am, guests need to use the service entrance around back," he said, keeping his tone low, as if he hoped to hide the confrontation from the onlookers. Still, a few nearby socialites caught the moment and exchanged smirks, whispering behind manicured hands. A woman dripping in diamonds leaned closer to her companion and snickered something Amelia couldn't quite hear, but understood perfectly. Amelia straightened her posture, feeling the weight of their stares. "I was invited," she said quietly, her voice steady but kind. The guard didn't even glance at a list. He gave a tight, apologetic shrug. "Sponsors prefer a certain image, ma'am. Please." The words were polite enough, but the message cut sharply. She wasn't the image they wanted on display tonight. A few feet away, a young intern holding a clipboard watched, her face flushing with embarrassment. She shifted awkwardly, gripping the clipboard tighter, as if it might shield her from the cruelty unfolding. Amelia's eyes met hers for a brief moment. The intern's gaze dropped immediately to the ground. Without protest, Amelia nodded once and turned away from the red carpet. Her heels clicked softly against the concrete as she made her way toward the service entrance, each step echoing the invisible wall that had been thrown up in front of her. Behind her, the laughter and camera flashes resumed, louder now, as if her simple presence had been an unwanted shadow lifted from the glittering scene. The back entrance was a world apart from the grand entrance. A row of catering trucks lined the alley, and delivery staff in stained uniforms buzzed in and out of service doors propped open with bricks. Amelia maneuvered carefully around a rolling rack of dirty linen and an open trash bin, forcing herself to keep moving with her head high. No one greeted her here. No one offered a smile. She was invisible. Inside the grand ballroom, glittering chandeliers bathed the room in golden light. Waiters in black and white uniforms floated between round tables topped with towering floral arrangements. A string quartet played in the corner, and laughter rose in waves as champagne flutes clinked. In a small alcove near the exit doors, a lone table was set with minimal decoration, almost hidden behind a pillar. It was here that Amelia was quietly directed to sit. She took her seat without a word, her eyes sweeping the room not with bitterness, but with a deep, weary understanding. Near the front, tables were packed with well-known faces: business tycoons, social media influencers, politicians. Each one glittered under the lights, each one performing generosity like a stage play. Amelia folded her hands in her lap, her simple pearl bracelet catching a fraction of the light. Across the room, the young intern stole glances at her from behind a table of name tags. She watched as Amelia, sitting alone, accepted a glass of water from a passing waiter with a gentle thank you, her manners immaculate despite the snubs. The intern's chest tightened with a guilt she couldn't explain. She flipped through her clipboard, pretending to look busy, but couldn't shake the image of Amelia being turned away at the door. Meanwhile, the evening's host, a socialite, known more for scandal than charity, tapped her microphone and called for attention. The crowd hushed. "Tonight," she beamed, "we celebrate the people who make our world a better place." Polite applause rippled through the room. Names were read, accolades showered on donors who had posed for the right photos, donated the right amounts, or simply carried the right look. Amelia's name, the name attached to the largest donation of the evening, was never mentioned. A few attendees near Amelia's table whispered among themselves. One man chuckled, "Maybe she's here for the cleanup crew." Another woman tilted her head, assessing Amelia with a sneer, masked as a smile. "New money," she whispered, as if it were an insult worse than theft. Amelia sipped her water calmly, her face serene. She wasn't here for recognition. She wasn't here for applause. She had come because the cause mattered. Yet even as she sat quietly, she could feel the weight of judgment pressing on her from all sides. A silent verdict delivered without trial. The intern across the room shifted again, torn between duty and discomfort. Her hands hovered over her phone, hesitating. Should she tell someone? Should she say something? But the moment passed, and the gala swept forward, all golden light and hollow praise. Outside, in the alley behind the venue, a driver leaned against a black SUV, scrolling through his phone. The rhythmic thump of bass from inside the ballroom was faint here. Above, the stars were invisible against the city's glow. Amelia pressed her palm lightly against the tiny pendant at her collarbone, an unconscious gesture. It was a gift from her late mother, a symbol of faith not in people, but in herself. She had expected nothing tonight, and somehow they had still managed to give her even less. As another round of laughter burst from the ballroom, she stood and quietly made her way to the exit, slipping through the side door without disturbing the spectacle. The intern watched her leave, something bitter rising in her throat. She clutched her clipboard tighter, blinking fast as Amelia disappeared into the shadows. Inside the ballroom, glasses clinked and applause rang out for a philanthropy built on smoke and mirrors, while the woman who had truly given something real, something meaningful, walked out the service door. And far above the glittering chandeliers and polished speeches, the air outside began to tremble faintly, unnoticed, by the crowd still basking in their imagined reflections. The service corridor smelled faintly of dish soap and reheated food. Amelia moved carefully along its narrow path, weaving past kitchen workers balancing trays, delivery carts stacked high with supplies, and a few bored security guards sipping coffee from paper cups. No one paid her any attention here. She was just another shadow blending into the hum of the working world that kept the glittering event afloat without ever being seen. She followed the signs toward the main ballroom, her heels making small, polite clicks against the concrete floor. When she finally emerged into the glowing grandeur of the ballroom, the contrast was almost blinding. Chandeliers threw diamond-like reflections across polished floors. A live quartet played gentle background music as uniformed waiters floated between tables like clockwork. Guests decked out in designer finery filled the space with a steady hum of conversation and laughter. Amelia scanned the room briefly, spotting her assigned table tucked away near the emergency exit, half hidden behind a tall potted plant. Her table was a stark contrast to the ones near the front, where towering floral centerpieces and name-engraved place cards decorated each setting. Here a single modest arrangement of white daisies drooped in a thin vase, and her name was scribbled in black ink on a folded card that looked hastily placed. She sat down quietly, adjusting her skirt with smooth, practiced grace, and glanced across the room where the spotlight gathered around the VIP section. There, the gala's host, an actress turned philanthropist, who was more known for her scandals than her causes, stood with a radiant smile plastered on her face. As Amelia smoothed the napkin onto her lap, the host's voice crackled through the speakers, commanding attention. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her tone syrupy sweet, "tonight is about honoring the extraordinary souls who make a real difference in the world. Let's raise a glass to our special guests." Applause thundered through the room as names were called: hedge fund managers, heirs to fortunes, reality TV stars posing as benefactors. The crowd clinked glasses in carefully staged displays of generosity, and photographers swooped in to capture the curated moments. Amelia's name was never spoken, not once. She reached for the glass of water placed before her, lifting it carefully to her lips. Her hand trembled slightly, just enough to cause the ice to clink against the rim. She steadied herself, forcing her face into an easy, composed mask. No one noticed her there in the shadows, and no one cared to. At the far end of the room, near the bar, a cluster of young men in tailored suits leaned in toward each other, speaking in low voices meant to exclude but still carry just enough to wound. One of them, his tie already loosened despite the early hour, snickered. "Who let the nanny in?" he said, tipping his glass toward Amelia's table with a cruel smirk. His friends laughed too loudly, catching the attention of others nearby. Another woman, her dress shimmering with beads that caught every light, added without hesitation, "Probably here to work the coat check. Poor thing looks lost." Their laughter mixed into the background noise, unnoticed by most but slicing sharp for those who heard. Amelia did not turn her head. She placed her glass back down on the table, fingers light against the linen, her posture impeccable. Her face remained calm. The only betrayal of emotion, a slight tightening around her eyes. She had lived enough life to recognize that silence sometimes was louder than anything she could say. Across the room, the young intern who had witnessed Amelia's earlier humiliation stood behind the event's welcome table, fidgeting with the lanyard hanging around her neck. She kept sneaking glances at Amelia, guilt gnawing at her more fiercely with each passing moment. It wasn't just wrong. It felt personal now. The way Amelia held herself, dignified yet small in that massive room full of self-congratulation, made the intern's stomach knot tighter with each shallow breath. The intern's supervisor, a sharp-eyed woman with an air of permanent disapproval, approached briskly. "Keep an eye on the floor," she barked under her breath. "Make sure no one is wandering around who doesn't belong." She didn't glance toward Amelia but somehow included her in the warning by tone alone. Nodding stiffly, the intern shuffled through her clipboard, pretending to review names, but her mind raced. She remembered the guest list. She remembered seeing Amelia Warren's name, neatly printed next to the biggest donation figure they had received this year. Half the event's funding tonight existed because of the woman they had just publicly shamed. Before she could gather the courage to say anything, two board members, wealthy, tanned men with identical smug grins, sauntered up to the bar a few feet from her station. They ordered top-shelf whiskey, laughing at a private joke. Then one of them gestured toward Amelia's lonely table. "Man, I don't know who thought it was a good idea to let the help sit down," he said, not even bothering to whisper. The other chuckled into his glass. Probably thought she was part of the cleaning crew, or worse, someone's sad little charity. "Case." The intern stiffened. She stared down at the list on her clipboard, where Amelia's name sat right next to the check that had saved tonight's gala from bankruptcy. A hot, furious pressure built in her chest. Amelia, still seated alone, gently rearranged the utensils at her place setting, keeping her hands busy, dignified. Around her, conversations buzzed and whirled like she was a ghost passing through the real party. The intern bit the inside of her cheek to keep from crying. She couldn't understand how people could be so cruel to someone who had given so much, asked for nothing, and carried herself with more grace than anyone in the room. She looked again at Amelia, who at that moment lifted her chin slightly, her eyes catching the stage where another hollow speech was beginning. The intern tightened her grip on the clipboard, her fingers whitening around the edges. For the first time that night, she made a decision. Maybe she couldn't fix everything, but she could find out why this had happened. And maybe, just maybe, she could find a way to make it right. In the distance, the low thrum of unseen possibilities stirred. But inside the ballroom, the game of appearances went on, blind to the storm it had quietly begun to summon. Near the side of the ballroom, Amelia stood quietly, her presence almost blending into the wall behind her. She was just lifting her glass when a sudden crash of breaking glass snapped through the air. A young server, barely older than a teenager, had stumbled backward after being bumped by a large, impatient guest waving his arms in animated conversation. The tray of champagne flutes he carried shattered at his feet, liquid splattering across the polished floor. Gasps and annoyed murmurs rippled through the nearby tables as guests lifted the hems of their dresses and polished shoes away from the mess. The guest who had caused it shook his head in disgust, muttering, "Clumsy staff," before turning back to his companions without even an apology. The boy, red-faced and panicking, bent down hurriedly, trying to gather shards with shaking hands. Without hesitation, Amelia knelt beside him. She placed a gentle hand on his shoulder, steadying him. "Slowly," she said softly, her voice barely rising above the hum of music and conversation. "You'll cut yourself." She reached for a nearby cloth napkin and carefully began helping him gather the larger pieces, moving with a quiet dignity that seemed to create a small bubble of calm around them. Across the room, a few staff members paused in their tracks, watching. The servers, the caterers, the workers who had gone unnoticed all evening, noticed this. In a place where kindness had been traded for spectacle, Amelia's simple act of grace whispered louder than any speech from the stage. The boy gave a grateful, watery smile. He muttered, "Thank you," as Amelia handed him the cloth bundle of broken glass. She patted his arm lightly. "It's all right. Accidents happen," she said, rising smoothly to her feet, brushing a few droplets of champagne from her dress with a small, almost amused gesture. As she turned back toward her lonely table, the young intern watched, her heart pounding harder with each beat. It wasn't just guilt now. It was anger. How could the people here not see who they were snubbing? She swallowed hard, her mind racing. She needed proof, something undeniable. Clutching her clipboard, she moved away from the crowd, slipping through a side door marked "Staff Only." Down a narrow hall and past a kitchen bustling with frantic workers, she found a small, cluttered office. Filing cabinets lined the walls, and a lone desktop computer hummed quietly on a battered desk. She closed the door behind her and pulled up the digital guest list. Her hands trembled slightly as she scrolled past dozens of names, celebrities, CEOs, trust fund kids, until she found it. There it was, Amelia Warren, and not just listed, highlighted under a bold header that read, "Honorary Guest, Major Donor." The intern stared at the screen, feeling like the floor had shifted under her feet. Amelia hadn't just been invited. She was one of the event's pillars. She had funded half of this glittering lie they were calling a charity gala, and they had forced her to use the back door. Her stomach twisted as she printed out the page, folding it carefully into her clipboard. Her mind buzzed with fear and uncertainty. Should she say something? Would anyone listen to her? Would she get fired? She pressed a hand against her chest, breathing slowly, willing herself to find courage in a place that worshipped appearances more than truth. Back inside the ballroom, the gala rolled on, oblivious. A presenter stepped onto the stage, a woman, with sparkling teeth and a dress that looked sewn from falling stars. She smiled for the cameras and announced the winner of the night's Humanitarian of the Year award. A wave of applause broke out as a well-known socialite waltzed onto the stage, her designer gown trailing behind her like a royal train. The woman blew kisses to the crowd, accepting the award with a speech so polished and hollow it felt like a parody. "It's not about the spotlight," she insisted with perfect irony, posing for flashbulbs the entire time. "It's about making a difference." Photographers swarmed the stage, capturing every angle. Images that would fill tomorrow's news feeds and magazines, selling the story of a night dedicated to giving, never revealing the truth of who had actually given the most, and who had been left standing in the shadows. Amelia remained seated at her tiny corner table, politely clapping, her expression unreadable. She seemed to exist in a different world from the spectacle unfolding in front of her, a world not built on image, but on action, on meaning. The intern returned to the edge of the ballroom, her clipboard hugged tightly against her chest, the folded page burning like a brand inside it. She scanned the room, eyes darting from the oblivious guests to Amelia's solitary figure. She chewed her lip, hesitating. She could walk up to the microphone during a lull. She could hand the printout to someone important. She could do something, but the fear froze her in place. She was just an intern, invisible in the eyes of people who mattered here. Just like Amelia had been made to feel invisible. Her hands trembled. What would happen if she spoke up? Would they throw her out too? Or would it all be buried like nothing had ever happened? Amelia rose from her table, gathering her small clutch and wrapping her shawl around her shoulders. She moved gracefully through the tables, unnoticed, unbothered by the self-congratulatory celebrations around her. The intern's heart thudded painfully in her chest. She took a step forward, opened her mouth, but the words tangled and died in her throat. Amelia slipped out through a side door leading to a small balcony overlooking the city. The air was cool against her skin, sharp and clean compared to the perfume-drenched ballroom. She leaned lightly against the railing, staring out over the glittering sprawl of Los Angeles, her face still, her expression unreadable. Her phone buzzed in her hand. She glanced down, reading the message that popped up on the screen. After a moment's pause, she pressed the device to her ear and spoke in a low, calm voice. No anger, no desperation, just certainty. Yes, she said simply. It's time. She ended the call, slipped the phone back into her clutch, and straightened her shoulders. The city lights reflected in her eyes, a quiet fire sparking somewhere deep and unshakable. Back inside, the music swelled, another toast was raised, and the illusion of generosity carried on. But outside, the real story had just begun to shift. Inside the ballroom, the energy shifted again as the evening approached its grand finale. Waiters rushed discreetly to refill champagne flutes, while guests straightened their gowns and tuxedos, readying themselves for the final round of applause and self-congratulations. At the front of the room, near the stage, the board president adjusted his cufflinks and stepped forward, his champagne glass raised high. "Ladies and gentlemen," he boomed into the microphone, his voice smooth and practiced, "tonight has been nothing short of extraordinary. Thanks to the generosity of some truly remarkable individuals." He paused for dramatic effect, letting the crowd lean in with smug anticipation. "We are able to continue our important work for another year." Applause burst from the tables, nearest the stage, spreading outward like a ripple of forced enthusiasm. Names were rattled off, each one heavier with wealth and lighter on actual contribution. Flashes went off as photographers captured every handshake, every polished smile, every perfectly angled toast. Near the exit, away from the camera flashes and grand speeches, the young intern spotted a familiar figure. Amelia stood alone, half-shadowed, by a decorative pillar, observing the scene with an expression too composed to be casual. Her shawl was draped neatly over her arms, her clutch tucked close to her body. She didn't look bitter. She didn't look angry. She just looked finished. The intern's throat tightened. She made her way toward Amelia, weaving through a maze of tables and oblivious guests. When she reached her, she hesitated for half a second, gathering the courage that had eluded her all night. "You don't belong out here," she said softly, her voice shaking just enough that she hoped Amelia wouldn't notice. Amelia turned her head slowly, her face illuminated by the soft gold glow of the chandelier light. For a heartbeat, she said nothing. Then she offered the intern a sad, gentle smile, the kind that carried more understanding than 100 words ever could. "Sometimes," Amelia said quietly, "people show you exactly where they think you belong. And sometimes—" She paused, her smile deepening, almost secretive now. "You show them." The intern opened her mouth to respond, but Amelia was already moving. With a calmness that seemed almost unreal against the glittering chaos of the gala, she stepped aside and reached into her clutch. Her fingers closed around her phone. She dialed a number without hesitation and lifted it to her ear. There was a moment of silence, filled only by the muffled clinking of glasses and the president's continuing speech about unity and vision. Then Amelia spoke, her voice low but sure. "It's time. I'm ready." She ended the call and slid the phone back into her clutch with a final, almost ceremonial grace. She didn't look at the intern again. She didn't need to. Her message had already been delivered, quiet, dignified, and unstoppable. The intern watched, stunned and rooted to the spot, as Amelia turned and walked toward the far end of the ballroom, past the linen-draped tables, past the velvet ropes separating the important from the invisible, past the guards who had once tried to steer her around the building like an inconvenience. Amelia moved toward the service doors, where a narrow corridor led outside to the back patio, usually reserved for deliveries and trash runs. No one stopped her this time. No one even noticed. In a room full of eyes desperate to be seen, Amelia had become the most invisible person in the building, and somehow she carried it with the power of a queen moving through her own palace. The intern followed at a distance, heart hammering wildly in her chest. She didn't know what Amelia was planning, but she knew, deep in her bones, that something was about to happen, something that would make tonight unforgettable for reasons no amount of PR could ever spin. The doors swung open, with a metallic creak, letting in a sharp breath of cool night air. Amelia stepped onto the concrete patio, heels tapping softly against the ground. The alley was dimly lit, the sounds of the Gala muffled and distant now. A few service trucks idled nearby, their engines humming in the background. Then, from somewhere, far off, a different sound began to rise, a low, steady hum, barely noticeable at first, like the beating of wings against the night sky. Amelia paused near a row of delivery vans, her eyes lifting toward the dark horizon. The intern came to a halt just inside the door, her clipboard clutched tight against her chest, her breath catching in her throat. The hum grew louder, deeper, vibrating through the concrete underfoot. Some of the catering staff glanced upward, confused. A few guests near the rear of the ballroom turned their heads toward the sound, their conversations faltering. Inside, the president stumbled slightly over his next line, glancing at the ceiling as if expecting it to cave in. Amelia stood perfectly still, the cool wind lifting the edge of her shawl, her silhouette cutting a sharp, dignified figure against the murky backdrop of trucks and discarded crates. She showed no sign of fear, no urgency, just a quiet, unshakable certainty. The intern took a half step forward, torn between awe and panic. She wanted to shout, to warn someone, to explain that they had made a mistake so massive that it could not be contained inside any ballroom, no matter how grand. But Amelia didn't need a warning. She didn't need saving. She had come prepared. The low hum deepened into a roar, the night splitting open as a shape began to emerge from the darkness, a shape sleek and powerful, gleaming under the faint city lights. Amelia lifted her face to the sky, a small, almost invisible smile playing at her lips. The intern stared in stunned silence, heart thundering as realization washed over her. This wasn't just a guest leaving early. This was something else entirely, and Beverly Hills was about to remember the name Amelia Warren, whether they wanted to or not. Inside the ballroom, the final toast was already underway when the first flicker of lights made a few heads turn. Glasses paused mid-air, conversations dipped, confusion flickering across glittered faces. A second later, the chandeliers shivered slightly, dangling crystals catching the tremor of something heavy pressing against the air outside. Murmurs began to spread through the room. Near the doors, a few guests drifted toward the windows, craning their necks. Then the noise hit, the deep, chopping roar of helicopter blades slicing through the night, growing louder by the second until it rattled glasses on tabletops and sent napkins fluttering. The floor itself seemed to vibrate underfoot. Guests gasped, some instinctively shielding their carefully styled hair as the sound grew deafening. Security staff scrambled, speaking into radios, rushing toward the exits, unsure if it was a mistake or an emergency. The host, who just moments earlier had been posing with her crystal award, stumbled slightly as the wind from outside punched through the partially open service doors. Plates clattered, decorations toppled, centerpieces tilted dangerously. A wall of flashbulbs erupted as photographers, thinking it was some outrageous stunt, lifted their cameras toward the lawn beyond the back patio. The Gala's delicate, curated perfection tore at the edges, like a cheap backdrop being ripped apart by a force that refused to be ignored. Amelia walked calmly back toward the main gathering, the wind tugging her shawl back from her shoulders. Her hair whipped around her face, yet she moved without urgency, her heels finding solid ground as if the chaos parted for her. She cut across the stunned crowd, who backed away instinctively, leaving a path as if something regal, something unstoppable, was passing among them. Outside, the helicopter touched down with a controlled, powerful grace. Its door swung open, with a hiss. Painted across its side in bold, unmistakable letters was a name few at the party had ever dared associate with one face: the Warren Global Foundation, a charity whispered about in Forbes articles and major humanitarian headlines, always private, never linked publicly to any one individual, until now. A sharply dressed pilot emerged, stepping briskly toward the crowd with clear purpose. His eyes found Amelia instantly. He moved through the crowd without hesitation, ignoring the frantic event organizers who tried to block his way. When he reached her, he gave a respectful nod, a gesture full of recognition and deference. The board president, standing at the foot of the stage with his champagne still raised mid-toast, went ghostly pale. The host, slack-jawed, clutched the award at her chest as if it might shield her from the truth crashing down around her. The intern, still huddled near the service doors, watched with wide, unblinking eyes as the whispers began to sweep the room. Like wildfire. Who is she? Wait, is that her foundation? She's the real donor? No way. She came through the back door, didn't she? The glamorous facade of the night, built on polished lies and empty applause, trembled at its foundation. Amelia stepped onto the low platform that had served all night as a shrine to empty vanity. She didn't seize the moment. She didn't need to. The moment bent toward her naturally, drawn by something real in a place that had forgotten what real even looked like. A staff member, face stricken with sudden panic, rushed forward with a microphone clutched in sweaty hands. Without a word, they extended it toward her, the same way someone might extend a sword to a queen they'd just realized too late they had insulted. Amelia accepted the microphone with calm, steady fingers. She turned to face the crowd, her posture regal, her expression unshaken. The pilot stood quietly at a respectful distance behind her, the still rotating blades of the helicopter throwing gusts of air that rippled the gowns and suits of the stunned guests. Around her, silence spread, deep and growing. All the speeches, all the rehearsed charity platitudes, all the photo ops, they shriveled in the shadow of what now stood at the heart of the gala. The intern swallowed hard, heart thundering in her ears. She had seen the names, seen the truth, but even she had not fully grasped the weight of who Amelia Warren really was until this moment. Amelia raised the microphone slowly, not for drama, but simply because she understood the rhythm of human hearts, when they were cracked wide open by humility. She didn't glance at the host, still clutching her meaningless award. She didn't look toward the board president, whose hand trembled slightly now around his glass. She looked straight at the room that had made itself small with vanity and watched them waiting. The cameras that had once eagerly sought out only famous faces now pointed directly at her, lenses clicking desperately to capture the moment they all knew would define the night, and possibly their careers. A heavy, stunned breath rolled through the crowd. They were ready to listen now, ready in a way they never had been when they thought they knew who mattered. Amelia let the silence stretch a moment longer, allowing it to burn into their memories deeper than any speech ever could. And when she spoke, her voice was low, clear, and devastatingly kind. Amelia stood still, the microphone loose in her hand for a moment longer before she raised it to her lips. Her voice, when it came, needed no force to cut through the thick, weighted silence that had settled over the ballroom. It was calm, even, devastating in its simplicity. Tonight was supposed to be about recognizing generosity, she said, her words rolling gently across the stunned crowd. But real generosity doesn't wear a dress code. It doesn't arrive in a certain kind of car. It doesn't need the right face on a magazine cover to matter. A ripple went through the room. Some shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Others, too proud to look away but too ashamed to meet her eyes, stared down at their polished shoes or the condensation slipping down the sides of their untouched champagne glasses. Amelia didn't rush. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't call out names or point fingers. She didn't need to. The weight of the truth she carried was enough to bend the air around her, pressing the shallow glamour of the evening into something small and almost pathetic. "I gave tonight," she continued, her tone never wavering. because I believe in the causes this event claimed to champion, in feeding the hungry, in building homes for families who don't care if your dress is off the runway, in providing education for children who have never owned a pair of polished shoes, let alone walked a red carpet. A man in the front row shifted in his seat, coughing lightly to cover his discomfort. A woman beside him tugged at the neckline of her gown, her face burning under the makeup that no longer felt like a mask strong enough to protect her. "But I can no longer support organizations," Amelia said, her voice cutting through them like a thread through silk, "that value appearances more than people, that see the worth of a guest based on the car they drive or the price tag on their dress." Whispers began to swirl again, not with curiosity now, but with raw, biting shame. Amelia's gaze moved slowly across the room, catching the faces of the board members who had laughed at her, the host who had paraded around on a pedestal built of emptiness, the socialites who had smirked at her at the door. None of them could meet her eyes now. Her words didn't need embellishment. They were truth, raw and clean like the cold night air pressing against the shattered perfection of the gala. "My foundation," Amelia said simply, "will withdraw all future funding from events and organizations that cannot see beyond the surface." The announcement fell into the room like a stone into still water. No one clapped, no one cheered. For a breathless moment, it was as if the entire ballroom forgot how to breathe. At the side of the room, near the service doors where she had first been turned away, the young intern felt her heart clench painfully. Her hands moved before she could stop herself. She began to clap, once, twice, sharp, crisp sounds that broke the heavy silence like a hammer against glass. For a moment, she was alone in it, her applause echoing embarrassingly loud in the vast hall. She almost faltered. But then another hand joined hers, and another. A few guests, the ones who had spent the evening silently observing, not playing the game of appearances, added their hands to the growing sound. It spread slowly, awkwardly at first, then with building strength, until the room pulsed with genuine, uncertain applause. The fake socialites, the board members, the carefully curated elites shrank into their seats, their faces frozen in polite, brittle smiles that couldn't hide the deep flush of humiliation. Amelia said nothing more. She didn't bow. She didn't wave. She didn't acknowledge the applause that followed her now like a reluctant tide. She simply lowered the microphone, placed it neatly on the podium, and turned. Her back was straight, her steps unhurried. She moved through the parting crowd without looking down once. The same people who had laughed at her, who had judged her, who had rendered her invisible, now stood aside, silent and small, as she passed among them. Outside, the helicopter blades churned the air, a roaring heartbeat against the stunned quiet inside. Amelia stepped onto the patio, the night embracing her like an old friend. The pilot stood ready, opening the door for her with a crisp nod of respect. Amelia paused for just a moment, allowing the weight of the evening to settle properly. Not as a burden, but as a stone foundation she would never have to carry again. She placed one hand lightly on the frame of the helicopter, lifted her chin toward the dark, sprawling city, and climbed aboard. The rotors increased their speed, kicking up a whirlwind that sent dresses and hair whipping wildly around the guests, who still stood blinking and frozen, trapped in the aftermath of a night they would never be able to rewrite. As the helicopter lifted off the ground, the wind tearing through the carefully decorated lawn and knocking over the last of the centerpieces, Amelia sat composed inside, her eyes forward, her figure framed by the open door for one last breathtaking moment. The image burned itself into every eye below, the woman they had dismissed rising above them all, not with anger, not with vengeance, but with dignity so complete it left no room for retaliation, only awe. The helicopter lifted higher, the gala shrinking beneath it, the golden lights of the ballroom looking smaller, cheaper, as the distance grew, and inside every head bowed in shame, inside every heart bruised by witnessing real greatness, the name Amelia Warren was carved deeper than any speech, any award, any golden plaque ever could. Weeks later, the echo of that night still hung over Beverly Hills, whispered about behind polished doors, and carefully worded press releases. The original Gala's organization scrambled to repair its image, releasing hollow apologies and blaming logistical errors, but the damage had been done. Sponsors pulled funding. Articles circulated, calling out the hypocrisy they had tried so hard to perfume. For once, the glitter couldn't cover the cracks. Far from the noise and the panic, in a simple sunlit hall nestled on the quieter side of the city, a different kind of gathering was taking place. No velvet ropes lined the entrance. No red carpet. No photographers shouting names. Just an open door and warm light spilling out onto the street, welcoming anyone who wished to enter. Inside, Amelia stood near a modest refreshment table, a glass of lemonade in her hand, watching as guests arrived. Some wore suits, others came in jeans and sneakers. Some held babies on their hips, others leaned heavily on worn canes. No one was turned away. No one was judged. At the entrance, the young intern, now proudly wearing a simple name tag that read Program Coordinator, greeted each person with a smile that reached all the way to her eyes. She guided them to their seats, introduced them to new friends, made them feel seen. Her movements were confident now, filled with a quiet purpose, Amelia recognized with a deep private satisfaction. Across the room, a familiar face moved through the crowd with easy laughter. The young server from that night, the one who had dropped the tray of champagne and tried to disappear into the floor, now wore a neatly pressed shirt and an ID badge that read Project Leader. He carried a clipboard full of real projects that would build real futures, speaking with a conviction that hadn't been there before. Amelia sipped her lemonade and watched them, not as a ruler surveying her kingdom, but as a gardener watching seedlings take root and flourish. She hadn't needed to fight for a place in a broken system. She had simply built a new one, stronger, kinder, open to everyone who had been pushed aside. A small brass plaque by the door bore no grand title, just a simple inscription. The Open Door Initiative. Everyone welcome. The laughter of children echoed from the play area set up in one corner. Older guests sat at long communal tables, swapping stories and smiles over plates of homemade food. Volunteers moved easily among them, offering extra chairs, pouring coffee, listening. Amelia let the sounds wash over her. The sound of a world she had once only dreamed of but now lived inside. No gowns glittered under false lights here. No curated smiles hid sharpened teeth. Here, kindness wasn't staged, it was the foundation. A young girl tugged at her mother's hand, pointing shyly at the small podium set up at the front of the room. On it rested a simple framed photo, not of Amelia, but of a community garden in full bloom, children laughing among rows of sunflowers. The mother leaned down, whispering into her daughter's ear, and the girl beamed. She didn't see Amelia as a benefactor or a figure to be impressed by. She saw her as part of something better, something real. Amelia smiled quietly and stepped back further, letting the new leaders shine. The intern, noticing her from across the room, gave a small, grateful wave, her face lighting up with the kind of gratitude that didn't need words. Outside the doors, the city buzzed on as always, but inside this simple hall, something rare and powerful thrived. A community not built on wealth or status, but on the belief that no one should ever be made to feel small, unseen, or unworthy. As the afternoon sun poured through the windows and laughter filled the air, a voice seemed to carry itself naturally over the scene, as if woven into the fabric of everything Amelia had built. They told her to use the back door. She answered by opening doors for everyone. And with that, a new chapter continued to unfold, one where every face mattered, every hand was welcomed, and every heart had a place to belong. If you enjoyed this story, please like and subscribe to the channel for more emotional journeys like this.